If stories the official record won't explain are the reason you're here, then you've come to the right place. This channel goes looking for the next one every week. Today, we're diving into a captivating piece of folklore passed down through a single family, alongside historical context on Ohio Valley mound excavations. This is presented as alternative history storytelling and discussion, not as a verified historical record. Our story begins in the summer of 1898 with a farmhand named Josiah Kettle. According to his family's tradition, Josiah was paid $2 a day, nearly triple the local wage, to dig into a burial mound on a stretch of bottomland outside Chillicothe, Ohio. He was told to keep a shovel's distance from the men doing the real work, to speak to no one about what came out of the ground, and to sign a paper he couldn't fully read before he was allowed to start. He signed it anyway. 6 weeks later, the dig was shut down overnight. Trenches were filled back in by lantern light, and every man on the crew was paid double his wage to go home and forget what he'd seen. Josiah, according to his family, didn't forget. He is said to have written it all down in a ledger book he used for nothing else, keeping it hidden in a toolbox in his barn for the rest of his life. The account further claims that his granddaughter discovered the ledger in 1961, going through the barn after his death. She didn't understand what she was reading, family members say, but kept it anyway. It reportedly sat in a cedar chest for another 50 years until a local historical society, cataloging donated family papers in 2014, transcribed it in full. And that's how this unique tale resurfaced. In 1898, Josiah Kettle was 26 years old, farming his family's rented plot along the Scioto River. One day, a well-dressed man is said to have arrived from Washington with a letter bearing a government seal. He made a request that made no sense to the local farmers. He wanted diggers, strong, quiet, and willing to work under a supervisor who would give orders and answer no questions. The mound he pointed to was one the Kettles had farmed around for 3 generations, a long grassy rise at the edge of their eastern field that nobody had ever disturbed, because disturbing a mound was considered, even among practical farming men, a bad idea. The supervisor called himself Mr. Ward. He never gave a first name that Josiah recorded, and according to the ledger, he carried papers claiming to represent a federal agency tasked with cataloging what the letter called Aboriginal earthworks of scientific interest. Whether that agency was real, misrepresented, or invented for the occasion, Josiah's account can't settle. Mr. Ward had 4 other men with him, none of them local, all addressed by surname only, and a set of surveying instruments Josiah said he'd never seen used on farmland before. The digging began in early June. For the first 2 weeks, it went as Josiah expected. Pottery shards, worked flint, the ordinary contents of hundreds of similar mounds already cataloged across the Ohio Valley by that point in the century. Then, in the 3rd week, at a depth Josiah recorded as near 11 foot, the crew's shovel struck something that stopped the work entirely for 2 full days while Mr. Ward rode into town and sent a telegram. What came up from that 11-foot depth, according to Josiah's ledger, was a skeleton laid on its back in a burial chamber lined with flat river stones. And the skeleton did not belong to a man of ordinary size. Josiah wrote that the thigh bone alone, laid against his own leg for comparison, reached from his ankle to well above his knee, a measurement that, if his account is accurate, would put the individual's height somewhere close to 8 feet. He wrote that the skull, when Mr. Ward lifted it clear of the soil, had a jaw and brow line he described as heavier built than any man I ever seen, front teeth doubled in a row same as a shark. Mr. Ward's hands were shaking badly enough that he dropped it back into the dirt before one of the other men caught it. 3 more burials came up from the same mound over the following month, each one wrapped and crated separately, each photographed by a man Josiah only ever saw from behind, working under a canvas awning erected specifically to block the view from the farmhouse. This is where Josiah's account stops being an isolated curiosity, at least according to the researchers who have compiled it alongside similar material. Some local history enthusiasts and independent researchers point to several other family accounts from across the Ohio Valley, in Chillicothe, in Newark, in Marietta, that they believe describe similar excavations between 1890 and 1905. These stories involve skeletal remains of unusual size and a similar pattern at the end. A sudden order to close the site, remains crated and shipped east under guard, and payment to workers conditioned on silence. Like Josiah's ledger, none of these accounts have been independently verified, and it's entirely possible that family storytelling, repeated across generations, converged on similar details independently of any real event. The official excavation reports filed for these sites during this period, the ones that survive in the public record, describe standard finds, ordinary interments, modest grave goods, skeletal material consistent with the population already documented in the region. The family accounts, where they can be compared, don't line up neatly with those official reports for the same sites and years. That could mean several things. Family memory reshaping a routine dig into something stranger over 3 generations of retelling is entirely possible. But it could also mean the public reports simply weren't the whole story. Without the original field notes, there's no way to know for certain, and that gap is exactly what keeps this story alive. The pattern extends beyond Ohio. Regional newspapers from Minnesota to West Virginia published, sporadically and without follow-up, brief items throughout the 1880s and 1890s describing mound excavations that turned up skeletons of unusual stature. These items appeared once, were never revisited, and never incorporated into the institutional literature on the region's earthwork builders. A number of these clippings have been collected and cross-referenced by independent researchers over the past 20 years. The geographic spread is difficult to explain as a simple pattern of local exaggeration, since the specific measurements reported, skulls, femurs, jaw structure, recur with a consistency that unrelated frontier newspapers should not have been able to coordinate. What happened to the material after it left the mounds is the part the record goes quiet on entirely. Josiah's ledger records the crates leaving by wagon toward the rail depot at Chillicothe, consigned, in his words, to the government building in Washington. No accession record matching that description has ever been located in a public catalog. Though it's worth saying plainly that record-keeping from this exact era is genuinely patchy across many federal and state collections, with real, well-documented cases of 19th century accession ledgers being lost, reorganized, or never properly indexed in the first place. That mundane explanation may well be the true one. It's simply impossible to rule out the stranger one either, and that uncertainty is the heart of the story. This is the piece that Tartaria and Old World researchers online have folded into a much larger and more speculative theory, and it's worth being clear that it is a theory, not an established finding. The mound-building cultures of the Ohio Valley were, by the mainstream archaeological record, a pre-agricultural, pre-literate society working without draft animals or the wheel. And the earthworks they left behind, like the geometric enclosures at Newark and the solar and lunar alignments at Fort Ancient, genuinely do reflect a level of coordinated labor and astronomical observation that many find remarkable for that description. Fringe researchers take that real, well-documented sophistication and argue it points to an older, physically larger population with capabilities beyond the standard timeline. Mainstream archaeologists strongly disagree, attributing the earthworks to the skill and organization of the known Adena and Hopewell cultures without needing any lost population to explain them. Either way, a set of excavations that reportedly surfaced unusual remains, conducted quietly and never fully cataloged for public review, is the kind of loose thread that keeps a story like this circulating. Josiah Kettle farmed that same land for another 40 years after 1898. He never dug near the eastern mound again, and according to his granddaughter's recollection of family stories, he wouldn't let his own sons near it either, though he never told them why. He died in 1959. The ledger sat in a barn for 2 years, then a cedar chest for 50 more, before anyone outside the family read what he'd written the summer $2 a day bought his silence. Mr. Ward was never further identified, and no public record of an agent by that name working in Ohio in 1898 has turned up in the agencies whose archives researchers have checked. Though, as noted, incomplete record-keeping from that period means an absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence he didn't exist. The crates never appear again in any catalog anyone has been able to locate. What's left is a farmhand's ledger, a handful of loosely matching family stories from 3 counties over, and a mound that still sits, refilled and grassed over, at the edge of a field outside Chillicothe. Closed back up in 1898, its real story, whatever it was, closed with it.